Amazon is facing an increasing amount of competition. Walmart is getting more traction than they have in the past. They're growing very, very quickly, and many more marketplaces are being created or have been created as of late. All of this equates to an increasing amount of competitive pressure on Amazon, who has a pretty significant lead at this point in time. Do you see that? How do you see all that playing out?
Yeah, this is a super interesting question. And just to peg it, let's say maybe on like a 5-year time horizon, which is long enough to have some reasonable predictions, right? Not like science fiction future. Yep. So I think in 5 years, I see generally the competitive landscape looking similar to today in terms of share, but e-commerce being much more significant as a channel, but generally the players maintaining their sort of relative share.
So bigger pie, everybody has the same size slice.
Roughly, yes. But I think there are a couple exceptions to that. And I think one of them is in particular is going to be in grocery. I think grocery is much less it's much harder to predict. Let me say it that way, because the idea that one of the big established players, Walmart, Target, Kroger in particular, could really leapfrog Amazon in e-commerce, that is a real possibility. They have far better supplier relationships. They have far more scale. They have thousands of brick and mortar locations, which obviously can be used for things other than people walking into shop. They're being used as forward distribution centers. They're being used as, buy online, pick up in store locations, and all of that. And then I think even that term of like, what is e-commerce? What is brick and mortar? That gets very fuzzy. But generally in this sort of, new commerce landscape, I would absolutely not count those guys out. They have a lot going for them, and they could really pose significant competition to Amazon in that category. I think when you get into hard lines, I think Amazon's basically won there, and no one's going to displace them. They already have just massive penetration in some of those categories. And then I think Softlines is interesting. I think Softlines fashion is something where Amazon is pretty dominant in the basics, but in more of the true sort of inspirational fashion categories, they have room to improve, I would say. And I think they do face potentially a death by 1,000 cuts phenomenon, where there's a lot of smaller marketplaces and niche players that could capture the majority of the e-commerce volume in fashion. And then I think you have these sort of wild card, relatively new entrants in this whole dynamic, which has traditionally been big brick and mortar retailers, e-commerce sites, and Amazon. It's kind of been the dynamic for a decade. But now you have Instacart, who I think is very impressive, and they're doing some really interesting things. And I think they pose a legitimate across the board competitive threat to Amazon. You have Shopify and other direct to consumer players that have the opportunity to sort of circumvent Amazon in a way that no one has really been able to do in the past. So I would say
let's go down. Sorry to interrupt you. I want to go down the Shopify rabbit hole for a minute, because it was about a year-ish ago. They announced that they were going to offer 2-day shipping, I think, nationwide. They were going to build out fulfillment centers. There was a lot of excitement at the time about them becoming a real competitor to Amazon, because they have this huge network of stores. They were going to be able to leverage that infrastructure combined with what they were going to build out to make the 2-day shipping. Is that playing out according to plan? Is it ahead of schedule, behind schedule?
I'm actually not super in the weeds on Shopify. So just to be kind of transparent about my expertise, historically and still, I'm really focused on retail and marketplace platforms. So to me, Shopify is a little bit over here. I think it's super interesting. I will just say generally, and I'm not probably as up to date on my news as others are, but I think anyone who's trying to build a fulfillment network to rival Amazon is in for that is a very serious undertaking. One thing that people tend to forget is that Amazon's been around for 25 years. So, this isn't something they just figured out in the last 5 or 10 years. They've been building this physical infrastructure for almost 3 decades. And that's how long it actually takes to build this stuff. So that is still probably their single biggest competitive moat, is their actual physical infrastructure, because it's so much harder to, you can't shorten that build cycle. Like, you can do that with digital infrastructure. You can build it very fast, but the physical buildings and everything that goes into that is tough. So that's why when you think of these big competitors, that actually is why Instacart is probably the most interesting competitor right now for me, because they don't need physical infrastructure. They're using a network of basically freelancers to serve that function, and the existing physical infrastructure then of all the upstream stuff that the other retailers have already built over 100 years. So they've potentially solved the access to the customer and the last mile issue. And that, I think, poses a really significant threat to Amazon.
Which is a great segue to the drones. Where's Amazon at with their drones?
I don't know, where are the drones? I thought we'd have at least some by now. I thought I'd see like 1 or 2 flying around Seattle. I don't know. I think the problem with drones is the same problem that you have with autonomous vehicles in general. Because, by the way, if the drones aren't autonomous, they're pointless. If you need a drone driver for every drone,
that doesn't scale.
Yeah. So the issue with drones is that if one time one of those things falls out of the sky on someone's head, that just cost you $100 million, in a lot. So the same thing with self-driving cars. It doesn't work if it's 99.9% effective. It's not good enough. So it's that last portion of a percent that they have to get right before they can release it into the wild. I will say 2 years ago at a conference, at the Mars conference, which they didn't do this past time because of COVID, but 2 years ago, they showed some kind of they announced some first release footage. I'm sure they're far beyond this now, of their latest drone. And it was incredibly impressive. I mean, it could use machine vision to identify a clothesline from like 50 feet in the air in someone's backyard to make sure it didn't land on that. I mean, something that a human eye could not see. They could up and, dog ran out, raised back up. So I think they're getting close. I really do. And actually, I did see for the first time in Seattle, one of the little autonomous delivery robots they have on wheels. So I think it was stuck when I saw it. I was driving, so I couldn't get out and mess with it. But I think in 5 years we'll start to see that. Although I also thought we'd have self-driving cars by now, to be honest. So did a lot of other people. It just hasn't happened yet, but we'll get there.
How about Amazon's experiment with the brick and mortar stores where you can walk in and just put the stuff in your bag and walk out?
That, I think, is a game changer. I think it's totally brilliant. I think in 5 years we'll have hundreds, if not thousands, of locations with this technology, including the 400 or so Whole Foods, but also a lot of other physical retail formats that they're testing. To me, it takes one of the biggest pain points of physical retail out of the equation, which is, checking out is annoying. And it takes time and you have to wait, and it's not a great experience.
Oh, come on. People love standing in line.
Yeah. That's why I don't go to Costco. I love Costco, except for standing in line. I refuse to go there. So I also think there's one other there's 2 other really interesting, maybe less obvious plays here, besides just the fact that customers don't like waiting in line. One is that you can make much smaller formats for brick and mortar stores. So think about basically a walk-in vending machine, the size of let's say a small walk-in closet. That would never have worked before, because the entire square footage would have been taken up by the checkout counter and the person that has to stand there. Now, airports, malls, in lobbies, you can have something that's bigger than a vending machine, but smaller than the smallest store. I think that's really interesting. 2, you can potentially monetize the data stream that those physical interactions are throwing off. So what you basically have is physical world consumer data, because all this is done with cameras and sensors that mirrors the level of data you'd have in an e-commerce environment versus what a traditional grocery store has, which is what did you buy when you checked out and what phone number is attached to your cart. That's it. That's all they have. Now you have the entire customer journey, basically, datafied, probably not a word, from start to finish, linked back to the Prime account. So I think that's going to be really important at scale.